Now I have to watch that session. All right, guys. Well, without any further ado, we're going to get to our really wonderful speaker through an introduction from one of our partners, Shannon Van Alken from Park State Bank.
Don't move my hand. Okay. All right, great. The pressure. Oh my gosh. Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of Park State Bank, I'd like to welcome you and thank you all for coming to the 2021 Itasca Summit. I think that this event was extremely timely. I think we have as a community, what we define community, I think we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, which also means that we have a lot of opportunities. And now is the time to act. And it's been a long time since we've had an opportunity to come together like this as a group to discuss the opportunities that lay ahead of us and the challenges as well. So thank you, IEDC, and all the partners for bringing us all together here these last 2 days. It really has been well worth my time, and I hope it's been well worth your time as well. So thank you. Round of applause. I can't clap, I can't let go. But my name is Shannon Van Alken, and I am one of the lenders, one of the commercial lenders for Park State Bank. Park State Bank is one of the largest independently owned banks in Minnesota with over $1 billion in combined assets. Park State Bank has 16 locations across the Iron Range, the North Shore and Duluth markets, and the metro area. We have a loan production office as well as a successful mortgage division. We take pride in our exceptional high-touch personalized service and commitment to the businesses we serve, regardless of size. We think the future is very bright, and we are looking forward to helping with the economic development needs in our areas. So thank you for letting us be an opportunity. So enough about me and Park State Bank. You want to hear about what's next. And what's next, in my opinion, is pretty amazing. So I'm excited to introduce Charles Marohn, known as Chuck to his friends and colleagues. Mind if I call you Chuck?
Oh, please.
Okay, thank you. He is the founder and president of Strong Towns, which is a 501c3 organization. He's a professional engineer and land use planner, and he holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master of urban and regional planning, both from the University of Minnesota. Chuck is the author of Strong Towns, a bottom-up revolution to rebuild American prosperity, as he hosts the Strong Towns podcast. Excuse me. He's also the primary writer for the strongtowns.org web content, fabulous website. He has presented Strong Towns concepts in hundreds of cities and towns across North America, and he has been named one of the 10 most influential urbanists of all times. Chuck is a longtime commentator on KAXC's Northern Community Radio. He currently hosts KAXC's Dig Deep program, which is a monthly examination of public policy issues affecting Minnesotans. If you've not listened to Dig Deep, I highly recommend it. Great program. Thank you. Chuck grew up in a small farm in central Minnesota, the oldest of 3 sons of 2 elementary school teachers. He joined the National Guard on his 17th birthday during his junior year of high school and served for 9 years. Thank you again for that. He loves playing music, is an obsessive reader, and his favorite team is the Minnesota Twins. Chuck and his wife live with their 2 daughters in their hometown of Brainerd, Minnesota. Please welcome Chuck Marohn.
Hey, great. This mic is working perfect. Hi, it's nice to be here. It's especially nice to be here in Minnesota. I only had an hour-and-a-half drive to get here today. Last week I was, where was I? I was in Fargo. The week before was in Kansas City and St. Louis, and a couple other places in Missouri. It's always nice when I can be here. The bio says Dig Deep is a monthly program, and I think it was before the pandemic, we tried to do a few episodes since then, and it's been a little difficult. So if you've heard me on Dig Deep with Aaron Brown, my friend, thanks for listening and thanks for supporting KXE. It's a great organization. It's a great community radio station. It's fun to be part of that. We're going to talk strong towns, and it's interesting because while I've never presented to this group here, the origins of the strong towns message is very much this region, from Brainerd to really northern Minnesota, where I worked for many years, doing civil engineering projects as an engineer, doing planning projects as a planner, working for a firm out of Brainerd, running my own company for about a decade. And then the early days of strong towns, trying to figure out what to do with this message and set of insights. I always feel an obligation when I speak in a group in this region to acknowledge the Blandon Foundation. I was very early on in the days of writing the blog Strong Towns that would eventually become this 501c3, and now, you know, an international movement with an audience of over 3 million and thousands of members around the world. It was the Blandon Foundation that gave me the capacity to figure that out. They actually sat down with me in the very early days and said, "We've been reading your site. This is really interesting stuff. What are you doing? You're a nonprofit. We're a foundation. What are your programs?" And I said, "I don't have any programs. I'm just trying to figure some stuff out." And they actually gave me 3 years of startup money to go and figure things out. And I'm eternally grateful to them for their support. Let's delve into this message, because like I said, my inspiration was this place here, trying to figure it out. And I found some comfort in the fact that other places around the country and around the world have benefited from these ideas, but this is really the origin place. So we can start with this. The idea of a concept, a complex adaptive system. Everybody in this room understands. Oh, I'm not advanced. We good?
Yeah.
Okay, now we're good. All right. So everybody in this room understands that a rainforest is a complex adaptive system. We have many different flora and fauna. They all interact in novel ways. They all can respond kind of independently to threats and opportunities within the environment. We recognize that a rainforest has a certain order to it, but that order is not imposed. It's an order that springs up kind of organically from all those complex interactions. We're very comfortable thinking of a rainforest as complex, but what we often don't ponder is how cities, particularly cities of the past, were also complex adaptive systems that were independent actors, were able to do things on their own, reacting to opportunities and disappointments within the environment, creating a system that would emerge into what you can think of as human habitat. These are complex adaptive systems, and a complex adaptive system is different than one that is merely complicated. If you look at a Rube Goldberg machine, we understand that a Rube Goldberg machine is really complicated. In fact, the complication is part of the novelty of it, right? There's all kinds of different things going on. But we recognize that if we cut one of these strings or move one of these blocks, the Rube Goldberg machine doesn't become something different. It just breaks. It just stops working, right? Think of your automobile engine. Your automobile engine is designed by some really, really intelligent people. But if you push your automobile engine beyond its capacity or beyond its limits, it doesn't evolve and become a toaster or a dishwasher. It just breaks. It just stops being an engine. This is the difference between systems that are complex and systems that are merely complicated. A complex system has a capacity to adapt and evolve and change. New patterns will emerge. If we subject a rainforest to an excessive amount of rain in a certain season or an excessive amount of sun, the rainforest doesn't fail, right? You may have different flora, different fauna kind of take over. You may have some change in its structure, but the system doesn't fail. It's able to overcome that. But take a cornfield, which is really a complicated system designed to do one thing and one thing very well. Take that system, subject it to an excessive amount of rain and an excessive amount of sun. It doesn't evolve and become soybeans. It just stops being corn. It just fails as what it's designed to do. We see the same thing when we look at human habitat. When we look at cities of the past, we understand that these were places designed to endure during times of plenty, during times of want, during times of peace, during times of strife. And we can look at cities that endured for, centuries, sometimes millennia, and we recognize that they had an internal structure that was adaptable, flexible, and in a word, strong. We are all very used to and very comfortable with a certain development pattern, a certain layout and design of cities today that really is a byproduct of this kind of post-World War II development pattern. One where we go out and we build things very quickly, and we build them all at once, and we build them kind of in a very efficient, uniform kind of way. Again, we look at that difference between a system that's complex and a system that's complicated. And we realize that a complicated system requires people who are very intelligent, very thoughtful, very smart. That's not the issue at stake here. The issue at stake is, can these places adapt? Can they change? Will they endure over time when subjected to stress and to less than ideal conditions? If we look at traditional development patterns, if we look at the way humans built their habitat, built their cities for thousands of years, we see something very instructive. This is Brainerd, Minnesota in 1871. So for those of you really quick at math, you recognize that we're having our 150th year anniversary this year. Big party, big celebration, yay. This is what it looked like at the very beginning. This is Front Street in Brainerd. And it's okay, you can check. Thank you. My kids laugh all the time. My wife's not so much. But go ahead, it's good. This is what it looked like back in 1871. I can guarantee you that there is somewhere a photo of Grand Rapids, Minnesota of this vintage, right? In fact, we could go around and every city in all of human history that was ever built began like this. Every city of the past, every city that was founded before the end of World War II began as a little series of pop-up shacks, some hopes and some dreams about the future. Understand what's going on in a place like this. This really represents a tiny bet on the future of a place. A bunch of people come together, they use the materials they can, they pop up something very simple. And if things don't work out, what happens? Well, the stock market doesn't crash, right? We don't have skyrocketing unemployment. We don't have a Federal Reserve bailout of the housing sector. A few people here will lose a little bit of money. They'll salvage what they can, they'll move on to the next place. Our landscape is full of places like this that never got beyond this stage. But a variety of complex things will come together often in a place like this, and it will become successful. More and more people will move here. They'll create little pop-up shacks on the other side of the street. You'll start to create a place. The fact that you're creating a place does this magical thing. It makes the land value go up. And so now the fact that more people are there, more commerce is there, make the land value go up. At the same time, what happens to these buildings? They're not very well constructed. They're not built to last. They're kind of small and cheap. They're little bets. The buildings start to fall apart and they actually go down in value. It's that combination of rising land values and declining building values that creates this natural redevelopment pressure. And what you see is that it becomes economically viable now to buy these properties and do something else with them. So 30 years later, here's what the street looks like. This is actually 1904, so 33 years later. And just like a culture growing in a petri dish, again, kind of this complex adaptive system, more and more people would continue to move to a place, land values would go up, you would get this incremental development pattern, city incrementally growing up, incrementally growing out, incrementally thickening up and becoming more intense. And after another generation, this exact same street, Front Street in Brainerd, would become this street here. Those 2- and 3-story wood structures now transformed into buildings of brick and granite. This is a complex adaptive system. It's how cities grow strong and resilient, because what you have here is you have an immense amount of wealth in one place. You have a kind of enduring level of stability that has now been created in the center, in the core of this community. If you were to go out a couple blocks from here, what would it look like in the 1940s? It would look like this. And if you went out a few blocks from that, what would it look like in the 1940s? It would look like the 1940s equivalent of this, right? A little pop-up shack. Again, think of this culture growing in a petri dish, incremental in all directions. You get this certain level of internal adaptability and flexibility. I can't remember what the next slide is. Because I could go in one direction or another. Let me look real quick. Oh, I know what it is now. This is I've been on this book tour since the beginning of September, giving a very different presentation. So this one I actually have not given for quite a long time. I really like this one. We get to this level here. And like I said, we have a certain level of wealth and capacity built. Here's what this same street looks like today. You recognize, maybe you've been to Brainerd, you recognize Front Street. If we go back to this shot here, this is taken from about the same spot. So if you want to grasp it in one kind of snapshot image, why our cities struggle financially today? Why do our communities have so many financial struggles just to basically keep core services around? Recognize that in this photo, there's $500,000 of public investment. We, as a community, I live in Brainerd, myself and my neighbors have $500,000 invested in the street and the sidewalk and the curb, the sewer, the water, the storm sewer, the street lights. You add all that up, it's $500,000 in just those 2 blocks. Where is the wealth that we're going to tap into to sustain all that infrastructure? Where is the wealth that we're going to tap into to pay to fix all that stuff? It used to be there. It used to be there in like in excess amounts, right? It is no longer there. We have wiped that stuff out, and it has become kind of a wasteland of parking lots and underutilized buildings. This is the story of North America. It's a story of the Iron Range. It's a story of Brainerd in central Minnesota. It's the story of the Midwest. It's the story of North America. I want to talk about why we did this. There's a slide in between there that I took out. So we'll go back to here while we talk about this. Now you saw the punchline for the next thing. It's okay. We'll tie it all together. My grandfather grew up in the Great Depression. He's passed away now, but I remember chatting with him about the Great Depression, and he, obviously many fascinating things to say. He was a teenager. He was just to give you a time frame for his life, he was a Marine in World War II who was in the first wave of troops into Nagasaki after the bomb was dropped. So young enough to not be in the early wave of the war, but old enough to be in the last kind of wave of the war. That was my grandpa. So he was a teenager through much of the Great Depression. And he spent a good deal of that living at the neighbor's house. They allowed him to sleep in the barn, and they would feed him if he would help work the farm. And he said he was more fortunate than a lot of other people he knew. We all know what Minnesota winter is like. I would not want to live in the barn, but he felt like that was a good thing. He described the Great Depression to me as a very, very difficult time. And I think it's hard for us to grasp how difficult and disorienting this was. You can read books today about the cause of the Great Depression. You'll read a really smart economist, and they'll explain, here's what caused the Great Depression, and you'll read this, and they'll be like, well, that's really smart. That makes a lot of sense. And then you'll read another economist or researcher who will say, well, here's what caused the Great Depression. And it's the exact opposite of the first book, but you'll read it and you'll be like, well, that's really smart too. Like, that makes a lot of sense. The reality is that nobody knows what caused the Great Depression. Back then, nobody knew. No one had any idea. And more importantly, nobody knew how to get out of it. The whole New Deal project was this idea that we're just going to try a bunch of different things and see what will get us out of this economic situation we're in. This was a time of massive amounts of desperation and really fear and unknown because we didn't know what was going on. What got us out of the Great Depression? What we're all told in middle school and high school is that what got us out of the Great Depression is, let's try this Minnesota, is what? World War II, right. Which, think about that for a second. If you're a bean counter in Washington, DC, if you're like a spreadsheet jockey and you're looking at this stuff and you're like, wow, GDP is going way up. Wow, unemployment's going way down. You're like, this got us out of the Great Depression. But sending millions of people overseas to kill and to die, taking millions of other people, putting them to work, building, all the implements of destruction, the ships, the planes, the tanks, the munitions, rationing gas, rationing sugar, rationing butter. This is not what prosperity looks like, right? Sure, GDP might be at a certain level, but do we want to sustain that? No. There was a recognition towards the end of the war, or as the war became evident that the Allies were going to prevail. It was just going to be how much time would it take. There was a recognition amongst the economists that were advising FDR that nothing fundamentally was different about our economy. That if the war were to end, and when the war ultimately did end, and we brought these millions of troops back home and we shut down all these factories, that we were just going to slide right back into the depths of the Great Depression. Why wouldn't we? No one knew what started it. No one knew how to get out of it. Of course, we were just going to go right back to that again. Everybody in this room knows that that's not true, right? And I showed you in the next slide, so you know what I'm going to talk about. It obviously didn't happen. And in fact, what happened was the exact opposite. What happened was the greatest boom economically that we had ever experienced, certainly in this country, but I think arguably in all of human history. We took all of that industrial capacity we had. We were the last major industrial nation not decimated by war. We had literally the gold, right? We were now the world's reserve currency. We had imported everybody else's gold as part of selling them stuff during both world wars. We were the unequaled economic superpower of the world. We had oil. We were pumping more oil out of the ground than Saudi Arabia. We were like the world's greatest producer of oil. Still. We had a culture united against common enemies. And united in a way that, I think I'm looking around and I've seen, most of you were alive during 9/11. Remember the day after, like Nancy Pelosi and George Bush, like holding hands and singing songs on the Capitol steps? I mean, we all felt united, like all those barriers just went away. That was what this country was. And we took all of that capacity at the end of World War II and we poured it into creating a new version of America. A new version of America that, the marketing brochure said would create prosperity and opportunity for everyone. It didn't all live up to the marketing brochure, but we still look at it today as like, with this nostalgia as like the greatest decades in American history. In fact, if we go back to 2016, and this is something I'm going to say, don't take this as a partisan statement, more of an observation. If we go back to 2016 in the presidential election, to me, what I heard, what I saw, were two 70-year-old candidates for president describing to us as a nation how they were going to bring us back to those 2 decades right after World War II. Whether that was a vision of blue-collar jobs and Ozzie and Harriet families, or whether that was a vision of a level of prosperity and growth where the federal government could be very generous in expanding things like Medicare benefits and Social Security benefits and helping people who had fallen behind. Whatever your vision was, it was that vision updated to today. The greatest couple of decades, the greatest generation, right? This is what we call them. And here's the amazing thing. It really worked. If the goal was to create growth and the goal was to grow the economy very quickly, create a lot of jobs, build a middle class, and create the American dream, this worked. I've got some maps here that I'm going to show you now. This is a map of Fresno, California. And it's a little weird to be in the Iron Range talking about Fresno, California. Trust me, this is going to rhyme with what you see around you. What I'm going to show you right now is the boundaries of Fresno, California as it changed through time. So this little yellow thing right here is the boundaries of Fresno in 1897. And I want you to watch in the pre-depression period of time, how Fresno, a major US city, grew incrementally, right? In this incremental pattern. So here's Fresno, 1909, 1922, 1934, and then we get to the end of World War II. And you see that Fresno has experienced ongoing continued growth, but the growth has been incremental. It's been in this 3 dimensions, incrementally up, incrementally out, and this continual thickening up. This is that complex adaptive system. Now, World War II is over. We're going to create a new version of America. We're going to reimagine an entire continent, and we're going to turn our cities into the engines of kinetic growth. So we're really going to grow our economy, create a middle class. Bam, here's what this looks like. So 1958, 1970, 1983, 1995, 2010. If we look around, we'll see on a smaller scale this exact same thing. In fact, Greater Minnesota at the end of World War II was roughly 13,500 people. Today, it is 13,500 people. It's 10 times the area. I want to get into the implications of that, particularly in our part of the world, because what we did is we took a complex system and we made it complicated. We took a complex system with all this adaptation and all this kind of messy internal things that made our cities strong and adaptable and resilient. And we said cities are now going to do one thing and one thing only. They're going to grow. And they're going to grow because that will solve all these other problems we have in society. Again, it worked, but not without consequence. This is some data that we put together as part of a study that I was involved in Lafayette, Louisiana. Again, stick with me. I realize Lafayette is a long ways away, but again, this will rhyme. At the end of World War II, Lafayette had a population a little over 33,000. Today, it's a little over 120,000. So 3.5 times the level of growth, right? That's a very robust level of growth in that period of time. Yet when we look at Lafayette and we say, what did it take at the end of World War II to provide drinking water to the people of Lafayette? It was 5 feet of pipe per person. Today, it's 50 feet of pipe per person, so 10 times the amount. What did it take to provide fire protection to the people of Lafayette? Well, at the end of World War II, it took 2.4 hydrants per 1,000 people. Today, it takes 21 times that. So we can look at the city of Lafayette and we say, wow, it grew really robustly. Look at the population growth. That's amazing. All the new jobs, all the new houses, all the new businesses, all the new economic transactions. But in order to get that 3.5 times level of growth, we had to input into the system 10 times and 20 times the inputs. Pause here for a second. Because a lot of times I'll show this to people and they'll say, well, Chuck, yeah, I get it. We have a much higher standard of living today. We have bigger houses, we have more cars, we have more space. We're living the American dream. We're much richer, much more affluent. None of us would want to go back to the way people lived in the dark ages of 1945, right? And then we look and say, well, how is that actually working out for us? And yes, well, we can, grow our population by 3.5 times by growing our liabilities 10 times and 20 times. What we see in city after city after city is that our wealth is actually nowhere near that. The median household income in Lafayette has grown only 1.4 times in that same period of time. The net worth of families has actually been declining for over 50 years in a median sense. And what we see is that the families in Lafayette, much like the families up here in the Iron Range, are taking on more and more debt, falling further and further behind, and not experiencing this wealth. Well, at the same time, the communities that they live in, and understand what I'm talking about, when I'm talking about a city government, it's not like a rivalrous relationship between us and them. We're literally them. This mayor and the city council is the president and CEO of a corporation that we belong to. The county commissioners are the the chair of the board or the board of governors of a corporation, an incorporated county that we belong to. This is like the lowest level of us doing things together. Our municipal corporations have taken on massive, massive amounts of liability and received in return comparably modest levels of growth and prosperity. Let me show you what this looks like on the ground, because it's actually quite jarring when you get into cities and get into neighborhoods. This is Washington Street in Brainerd. This is actually just a few blocks from my house. This is, in the 1920s, would have been the far edge of town. So remember when I showed you the incremental development pattern? And I said, you know, out on the edge, you would have had these pop-up shacks. In the 1920s, this was the far edge of town. So this would have been the next increment of out. And so these 3 blocks would have looked like that block on the left, the little pop-up shack. And the people who built those, they would have assumed that over time, the city would have continued to grow incrementally, as cities had for thousands and thousands of years. If the place was successful, more people would move there and would continue to grow. People who were born there would stay. They would, you know, build their houses. And eventually these 3 blocks would be closer to the center than the stuff on the edge. That would make the land more valuable. It would create, again, that redevelopment pressure, that kind of natural pressure to make things more, you know, more stories, more opulent, more intense. That's not what happened. These were built in the 1920s. Then we had the Depression, then we had the World War. Then we had this kinetic growth machine kick in. And Brainerd has grown horizontally, exclusively horizontal ever since. On the right, the block used to look just like the one on the left. The city labeled all of this blight, and they got the one on the right torn down, and now we have Taco John's, right? When I travel around the country and I show this particular slide, everybody looks at me a little weird because they don't have Taco John's. And I found that the best way to describe Taco John's to people who don't experience Taco John's is to call it Norwegian Mexican food. And they all seem to grasp right away what I'm talking about. I happen to like Taco John's, but I don't like this transaction per se. If you look at what we did here, this met every value that we have expressed as a community through our regulatory processes, right? This got rid of blight. Check. What we built meets all the building code requirements. So it's got the right floor area ratio. It's got ADA compliant bathrooms. It's got commercial sprinkler systems. These are all good things. I'm not arguing they're not, but they check all those boxes, right? It's got adequate amount of parking. We have minimum parking requirements in our ordinance. It meets that. It meets the sign ordinance. I'm not joking now. The environmental people advocated for green infrastructure. And so they actually have in this stormwater area back here, some weeds, some natural plants that, you know, filter stormwater. The bike walk people came and they wanted a sidewalk. The sidewalk ends right here, but they got that little stretch. If you go through the list of all of our priorities as a community, every single one of them was checked by this development. This development was seen as a massive success. Here's what nobody bothered to consider. That old blighted rundown block on the left is worth 1.1 million. That Taco John's, the same size area, the same amount of public infrastructure investment, the same cost to the community long-term to provide ongoing service and maintenance, is only worth $600,000. Understand what you're looking at. You're looking at, on the left, that complex adaptive system, that human habitat that was refined, that this approach to building that has been used around the world for thousands and thousands of years. You're looking at that in its infant phase, after almost a century of decline and neglect. And it still outperforms by a wide margin the stuff we're building brand new today. And everybody in this room knows the future of Taco John's, right? In 20 years, there'll be a new Taco John's up the road. This one will be a used car lot. Within a few years after that, it will be boarded up and we'll be trying to get some type of tax subsidy or TIF to get that torn down and redeveloped. We've all experienced that in our communities. This is a very compelling case study, but I want to assure you that it's not a cherry-picked example. It is representative of what we see over and over and over again across North America. I hope you're trusting me now on my examples, but this one is Buffalo, New York. And I'm going to start with Buffalo, New York, because Buffalo, New York is a city that has experienced steady decline over the last 100 years. Fewer cities in North America have suffered more for the last 100 years than Buffalo. In the early 1900s, Buffalo was one of the wealthiest cities in the world, certainly top 5 in North America. And if you go there today, you can still see evidence of this in the great buildings, the public buildings, some of the amazing things that they have. But Buffalo has lost population every single year since the end of World War II. It's been a steady downward decline with enormous levels of disinvestment. What I'm going to show you right now is a map of financial productivity. So asking the question, think of a farmer going out and spreading seed across a farm field. The parts of the field that grow up the most robustly, we would say that's the most productive part of the field. That's where you get the most bushels per acre. So where in the city is the most productive part of the city? Where do you get the highest value per acre? The most amount of wealth per acre? And in Buffalo, New York, it's in the core downtown. It's in that pre-depression pattern of development. Despite ridiculous levels of decline, if you went there, it will not look prosperous to you. Yet if you start to measure where the community's wealth is, it's in those neighborhoods that were built pre-Great Depression, and nothing else comes even remotely close. This is a pattern we see repeated in city after city after city, all over North America. It doesn't matter if it's a large city or a small city. It doesn't matter if it is a coastal city or an inland city. It doesn't matter if it's north or south, if it is affluent or poor. Every time where we see that incremental development pattern, that pre-Great Depression, walkable kind of neighborhood style of development, we see tremendous levels of financial productivity. And everywhere we see the post-war pattern, the further we get out from that shift at the end of World War II, the lower the levels of productivity become. I threw this one in today. This is Crosby, Minnesota. So many of you know Crosby. I remember I used to do planning when in the early 2000s, I ran my own engineering and planning firm here in central Minnesota. And one of the cities we worked for was Crosby. I remember when I went to Crosby, they said, Chuck, we've got some amazing stuff happening out here. We've got some amazing stuff happening out here. There's all these growth investments. But these neighborhoods here are really, really run down. We need to figure out how to get rid of some of the stuff and get it rebuilt. And guess where all their wealth is? It's in those poor neighborhoods. It's in the neighborhoods that are occupied by the poorest people in the community. This is a map of Lafayette, Louisiana. And I'm going to go back to Lafayette because we did this major study there. And part of it was to kind of reconcile the simple question that we're asking about financial productivity with a deeper question about financial solvency. If you look at this map, you'll see it looks very similar to the ones I just showed you. But if you dig into the data, this one's fundamentally different. In Lafayette, Louisiana, we went out and we said, where is all the sources of revenue that the city has? Where are the property tax coming from? Where's the sales tax coming from? Where are the utility fees coming from? And we took every source of revenue we had and we plotted them up on maps. Here's where they are coming from. We did the same thing then with their expenses. Where's their road maintenance expense? Where's their sidewalks? Where's their pipe? Where's their transit service? Where's their police and fire protection going? Where are their parks? And we added all those up and we mapped them all out. And at the end, we had about 36 different maps and we mashed them all together into this, which you can think of as an annual profit and loss map. Everywhere where you see a blue property, that's a property that pays more annually in taxes and fees than it requires in ongoing service and maintenance. Everywhere where you see red is the exact opposite. These are places that pay more, or I'm sorry, require more in ongoing costs and expense to the community than they themselves pay in service and fees. The higher the line goes, the greater the disparity. I think everybody here knows now at this point what we're looking at. In the middle there, that's the core downtown. To the right here, this crescent of blue are some of the original neighborhoods in the city, some of the poorest neighborhoods. I'm going to show you some photos of these places because I want you to see that this is not, from an eye test standpoint, what looks like prosperity. In the upper right-hand corner, you have the core downtown of Lafayette. No one goes to downtown Lafayette and takes photos and puts them on postcards. This is not like a place that exudes prosperity. You can get some great Zydeco music there, get a cheap taco, but you know, this is not like some amazing place. Yet financially, it's doing tremendous. It literally is subsidizing much of the rest of the community. That neighborhood, that crescent of blue, that bottom photo, as amazing as that is representative of what that area looks like. Incredibly poor, incredibly rundown. And let's just be clear, the analysis that we did here assumes that the city goes out and maintains the road, maintains the ditches, fixes the streetlights, does the work that they've said that they would do. The fact that they're clearly not doing that only makes that disparity even greater. What do those neighborhoods in red look like? Well, that's where you have the big box stores, the strip malls, the gas stations, the drive-through franchise restaurants, the windy cul-de-sac streets, all that stuff that we have become very used to building that we look at as growth and success. There are two subsidies going on in Lafayette, Louisiana. And they're the two subsidies we see in every community across North America. Subsidy number one, the old neighborhoods, and in this case, the poor neighborhoods, are subsidizing the affluent neighborhoods. This is what was going on in Crosby. This is what's going on in Brainerd. I think if we did the data, this is what's going on through every city in the Iron Range. Subsidy number two, future generations are subsidizing today's generation. All of this stuff that they're building in Lafayette today is built through some type of debt instrument. The developer comes in and builds a new development. The cost of all that infrastructure is wrapped into that package. When the buildings are sold, that's wrapped into a mortgage. People pay that for 30 years. It's sold onto a secondary market. There's some type of public investment made using debt in order to finance that new development or new key piece of infrastructure. All of this is built with this idea that we will experience growth today. We'll be able to cash flow it today without any accounting at all, zero accounting of the future liability and the future capacity of this new growth to meet that liability. Lafayette, with every development they do, grows poorer and poorer and poorer, even though it helps their short-term cash flow. In the city of Lafayette today, the median family pays $1,500 a year in taxes to the city. In order for the city to make good on everything they've built here, median taxes would need to go from $1,500 to $9,200 every year. That's 1 out of $5 a family makes. We need to get sent back to the city just to maintain basic core infrastructure. That's a shocking number. And it's a shocking number because I think we all like reflexively recognize that that will never happen. When we did this project 4 years ago, Lafayette had a backlog of street maintenance of $50 million and an annual budget of $3.5 million to deal with street maintenance. To give you some perspective. Today, their backlog is over $100 million and it's accelerating. And it's accelerating because a lot of this stuff was built at the same time. And now it's all going bad at the same time. And so that list of IOUs, that list of promises that they can't keep is growing and growing and growing. Here's a tragic thing. When we go to Brainerd, we go to Grand Rapids, when we go to Hibbing, when we go to Crosby, when we go to other smaller towns, what we see is that the disparity is even worse. We unlike a city like Lafayette, or unlike a larger city like a Duluth or a Minneapolis, which are very big systems with lots of stuff going on, we have so much less margin for error in small towns. One big project for us that goes bad is a disaster. It's a huge disaster, and we do them over and over and over and over again with the same kind of lack of prudence that leads to this kind of imbalance. Again, go back to the beginning. I think we can understand why we do this. At the end of World War II, we were trying to solve a problem. The problem was, how do we stay out of the Great Depression? Today, it's no longer our problem. Our problem is, how do we sustain what we have? How do we make better use of the stuff we've already built? I suspect in this room, there's some consternation over, maybe not, but I suspect, at least part of this audience, there's some consternation over the infrastructure bill being debated in Congress today. Maybe some think it's too big, maybe some think it's too small. I can tell you that even the largest plan proposed, so start with President Biden's massive plan at the beginning of this, before it was whittled down and you know, gotten to bipartisan compromise and what have you. That plan identified over 170,000 miles of roadway currently in poor condition. Of that 170,000 miles, that huge, massive plan that's been whittled down would only have fixed 27,000 over the next decade. That plan identified 45,000 bridges that were in a state of disrepair that needed immediate action. That massive, massive plan, that huge amount of spending that we've since whittled down in a bipartisan compromise, that massive plan of the 45,000 bridges in disrepair was proposing to fix 10,000 over the next decade, not even a quarter of the bridges. That's the big stuff. Who's going to come and fix your cul-de-sac? Who's going to come and fix the street in front of the most important shops in your community? Who's going to help us repair that pipe or that lift station when it goes back? We have an urgent problem. And the urgent problem is not, how do we get our next infrastructure fixed? How do we get the next big project? How do we land the next big company? It's how do we keep from falling apart? How do we take care of this stuff that we've already built and actually make something out of it? I want to spend the rest of my time talking about what I think this new version of America looks like. We embarked on a brand new version of America, this big experiment, and we took our cities that were complex and adaptive, and we said, we're going to solve this problem by making our cities complicated and efficient to do one thing over and over and over. And by the way, if you think local government is not efficient, you're wrong. It's bizarrely efficient. It is amazingly efficient at delivering a product over and over and over. That's why you can travel all over North America and our cities all look the same, because they're all designed to efficiently deliver a certain product over and over. We have to go the other way now, because we're solving a different problem today. And we have to say, how do we start to get some of that complex adaptive feedback that will help our cities become strong and resilient? How do we get some of that back? And the first thing we do is we recognize that all of our neighborhoods have to be allowed to breathe. They have to be allowed to change. They have to be allowed to grow. This is a very technical way of saying that. Allow the next increment by right. Every neighborhood at all times should have the capacity to develop itself to the next level of intensity by right. Those pop-up shacks should be able to become 2- and 3-story buildings without having to go through a massive amount of regulatory burden. I want to give you a sense of what this looks like. Oh, I'm going to skip this because it's not as applicable here. To do this, yeah, let me go back to this because I'm thinking now that it might be. There's a debate we're having. I hate to touch on this because I feel like you're all listening to me, and I don't want to inject something that would create a knee-jerk reaction. So let me preface it with this. If you feel in your heart, you know yourself, If you feel in your heart that you like tend to partisan react to things, I love my dad, but when I go talk to him, he spends way too much time watching cable news. And so the first like 20 minutes of our conversation are him like getting all that out of his system. It's like when you go in a sauna and you gotta like, you know, excrete all the chemicals. It's like you gotta excrete that from his brain and then you can talk to him again. I hope he doesn't listen to this because if you know you have like partisan reactions to things, please, for me, try to dial it down just for a second. There's this debate we're having right now across the nation about banning single-family zoning is what it's called in one context, and the other context, I don't even know what they call it. But it's such a frustrating thing because at Strong Towns, we've been advocating this for years and years and years, not using that language, not calling it that, because it's really a bizarre way to frame it. I also don't like the way it's been done. California just passed a law that, you know, quote unquote, bans single family zoning. And I think the idea here that when you hear that without any context is, well, you can't build a single family home anymore. That's not at all what it says. Let me say it in a different way. Right now, cities use zoning to tell you what you can and can't do with your property. In most zones, that's a very tiny list of things you can do. What California just did on a statewide level, and trust me, I don't like the bill, because I wish cities would do this on their own. It takes that very tiny list of things and adds one more thing to it. It doesn't say you can't build a single family home. It just says you can also build a duplex. I want to walk you through what a pre-Great Depression neighborhood was like. Say you had a bunch of people. I can think of my grandma who has a cute little house in Northeast Brainerd. She passed away in 1991, but I live near there, and so I walk by it often and I look at it, and I think, you know, she, for a variety of reasons, wound up to be living on her own, raising 3 daughters. You think of someone in that situation, and you look and say, what options do they have? Having struggled time making the mortgage, struggling to make ends meet, and now the roof starts to go bad. And the roof is not something you can ignore, right? You can't let the roof continue to leak. It will destroy your whole house. You have to fix it. It's like not an option. But you don't have the money. What do? Well, today, what do? You would go get a home equity loan, so take on more debt, basically give up the wealth that you've built in this house in order to sustain that investment. Again, fall further and further behind. And do that if you're lucky, if you haven't already taken out a home equity loan to buy a car or make ends meet in some other way. What would you have been able to do 100 years ago? 100 years ago, you would have been able to look at a house like that and say, you know what? We have a spare bedroom upstairs. We have a spare bedroom here on the first floor. You know what we're going to do? We're going to punch a hole through the wall, make a door to the outside, make that into an efficiency apartment and rent it out to a college student here, or someone working, in that case, at the paper mill a few blocks away. We won't make a ton of money from it, but the money we make will be able to fix the roof. Okay, can't do that today. It's illegal in Brainerd because you can't make that single family home into a duplex. Zoning says no. And so what we've done is we've taken options away from families. By doing that, we've made our neighborhoods complicated, but we've lost the complexity that would naturally thicken them up over time. When we talk about allowing the next increment by right, what we're talking about is creating options for people to respond to stress in novel ways. There's a compact that we create with each other. And the compact is designed to ensure that the things we do leave our neighborhoods, our places that we're trying to thicken up and build and get people invest in better off than when they started. And it's this compromise. No neighbor should undergo radical change. No neighborhood can be exempt from change. That's the way I would say this debate about ban single family zoning or, you know, protect the whatever, it's such a bizarre. We don't want any neighborhood in a complex adaptive kind of framework to undergo radical change. We shouldn't have Wall Street investors coming in, buying up 4 homes, tearing them down, building a 4-story apartment building. Like that's not what my neighborhood is. And I get people who don't want to see that happen in their neighborhood. I respect that. No one should move away from their neighborhood, come back 10 years later and have it be unrecognizable to them. That's not the compact that we have. But the compact we have can also not be, you get no options of what to do with your property except for the one thing that the zoning code allows. We have to allow our neighborhoods to evolve and change and thicken up over time. Along with this, we, especially we here in this kind of more fragile part of the world, we need to lower the bar of entry into our systems. We have, through a variety of reasons, I think a lot of which are good intention, raise the bar of full participation in our society. I'll give you a prime example, a 30-year mortgage. If you want to get a 30-year mortgage, if you want to buy a house, you need a 30-year mortgage. If you want to get a 30-year mortgage, what do you have to have? Well, something that all of us in this room probably have, which is a steady job, a work history. But all those people out there who are struggling between jobs, they don't have that. And so they don't get to participate the way that the rest of us do. And here's the thing, that's hurting us. This is something in Brainerd that we call a tiny house. My ancestors would have called this a house. What we have done is we have taken something that is really a starter home and we've made it this like weird thing that people do. So if you want to build a tiny house, you have to meet all the requirements of a house. Then you have to meet subpart A through M of the tiny house provision. You have to go beg permission from your neighbors. You have to genuflect in front of a planning board. You have to go through this long, drawn-out process to build what is essentially a starter house. My grandparents built a starter house. And you know what happened? They had a couple kids and they put an addition on the back. Then they had a couple more and they put a second story on. The neighbor next door came over and helped. They went over and helped them. This is how we have always built cities. Why have we made this illegal? This should not be illegal. This is literally the building block of how we build wealth in our communities. Here's another example. This one's from Muskegon, Michigan. Muskegon, Michigan, after World War II, had rapid deindustrialization. Tens of thousands of people left. The downtown was hollowed out. And they were having a really difficult time getting people to move in because to get into the downtown, you had to take these old buildings and you had to do all these things to fix them up. You had to put in the ADA compliant bathrooms. You had to put in the sprinkler system. You had to do all this stuff. And for startup entrepreneurs, people who are trying to figure out, how do I be of service to my neighbors and make money doing it? The added burden of asking them to become property developers and take on these long-term commitments for a business they didn't even know would work was just way too high. And so what they did in Muskegon, they went and bought a bunch of storage sheds. They painted them up funky colors. They filled in a gap in their streetscape and they rent them out at really ridiculously low prices with no long-term commitment to people who want to give something a try. All of a sudden, you've got all these people who are there, who are priced out of our current system, are not allowed to participating. I walk this with the mayor. People coming out and giving him hugs, giving him high fives. There's all kinds of like amazing energy around this place. Do you know where else there's amazing energy in Muskegon? In their core downtown. And if you go to the core downtown, what you'll find is a whole lot of people who graduated from here, got proof of concept, got the confidence to know what they were doing, were able to go in then and move into one of those more significant properties downtown and fully participate in the community. Last idea. And this one, I think, for this group is going to be the hardest. For people who are in that group of running communities, this is always the hardest one. So I'm going to ask you, after we're done here, to spend the most time thinking about this one. Because this, to me, is like one of the most important. It's a shift in our the way we create and experience growth. And it's a recognition that we have built more stuff than we have the tax base and capacity to maintain. And let me say that in a different way. And this is a way that's going to cut. And I don't mean it in a cruel way, but I want to say this with honesty and directness, because I think we need to come to grips with it. Every city in this county, my hometown of Brainerd, is a ward of the state today. We do not have the internal wealth to maintain our core required water systems, our core required sewer systems, our base level of services. We do not have the wealth. We cannot tax our people enough to actually maintain those things. And so this is shameful, and I'm part of this. Because I look at rural America and small town America as being this strong, resilient, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, make something out of nothing. I change my own oil, damn it, kind of place. We are wards of the state. We have built more stuff than we can sustain. And so the question we need to struggle with now is not how do we get that next big project? How do we get that big grant to build the next thing? How do we expand our systems? We have to ask ourselves, how do we make better use of what we've already built? Good news is that is an easy thing to do. The bad news is it requires us culturally to think about and talk about this stuff differently. So what we need to do is focus on how people are currently struggling to use the systems that we've already built. At Strong Towns, we've created a 4-step process to do this, a 4-step process to make what in financial terms are the lowest risk, highest returning investments that any city can make today. I'm going to walk you through this process. It's actually very, very simple. Step number 1, humbly observe where people struggle to use the community as it has been built. I'm going to stress humility here. The idea is to go out and as close as you can, walk a mile in someone else's shoes, experience the community as they experience it, free your mind of all your preconceived thoughts of what you're going to find, who you're going to find, how they're going to behave, what you think should be done here, and try to really experience the place as other people are experiencing it, with a particular focus on where it is hard for them to use the city as it currently exists. Step number 2 then, ask the question, what is the next smallest thing we can do right now to address that struggle? What is the smallest thing that we can do, not to fix this forever, not to come up with some comprehensive solution, not to get this bug so it doesn't come back and bite us? What is the thing we can do right now with straw bales and cones and duct tape and paint, the stuff we have on hand, to make this struggle that we're seeing a little bit easier? Step number 3, do that thing. Do that thing right now. Don't send it to a committee. Don't hire a consultant. Don't debate it for 6 months. It's a tiny little thing. Just go and do it. And then step number 4, repeat that process over and over and over. If we want to make better use of what we have, that is not a big macro sweeping change. It's very humble action over and over and over again. Jane Jacobs called cities a co-creation, something we build together. That is more true in the smaller town you get. I think we all recognize that to a degree, we're all kind of autonomous from each other, but in small towns, we're all like deeply connected. If we're going to co-create cities, if we're going to make them into complex adaptive systems again that can grow strong and adapt and become resilient, we need to humble ourselves to focus intently. We need to orient our systems to focus intently on where people are having a difficulty day to day, and not on the shiny object, the flashy new thing, the big ribbon cutting, or the brand new project. We can go down that route. And trust me, I've traveled all over North America, and I've seen cities that have this poison and sickness in them, that do this over and over. I pick on Lawton, Oklahoma here, but understand what Lawton, Oklahoma did. Someone in Lawton, Oklahoma went to a city, said, this place is really successful. Look, they've got decorative lights and a nice streetscape. Hey, guess what? There's a grant program for decorative lights and a nice streetscape. Let's go get that grant because that will solve our problems. And they went and did that. Guess what problems it solved? None. Because they didn't start where people were in the community. We're having this debate in Brainerd about building a children's museum. All of a sudden, a children's museum is like the thing we need. All these meetings are taken up with, should we build a children's museum? Where should the children's museum go? Why are we debating a children's museum? Because it's a grant program at the state to build children's museums. And one of our local organizations got a hold of that and started promoting a children's museum. I don't think they're bad people. It's just not the urgent thing that we need right now. Let me show you another model. This is in Memphis, Tennessee. Very poor neighborhood in Memphis, Tennessee, where you have an old, like, abandoned streetcar stop. A couple blocks of vacant buildings. Some people went out and with the materials they had, they swept up the buildings, they swept up the sidewalks. They worked with those business owners to do a little kind of street demonstration project. They painted their own bike lanes, they painted their own crosswalks, they put in a little mural. They invited businesses to come in and open up for a couple of days just to kind of demonstrate what this place could be like if somebody cared. It wasn't spectacular, it wasn't amazing, there wasn't like a grand opening ribbon cutting, but it was slightly better than what it was before. Here's the amazing thing. The city started to monitor what was going on in this neighborhood as a result of this project. I wasn't here for this project. I went out a year later. Some people brought me out and said, look what happened. What happened was every business, every storefront was now full. The people who owned the buildings were starting to increase the rent because there was so much demand. They saw buildings in this neighborhood being reclaimed, being fixed up. Buildings in the surrounding area start to be improved because now they live next to this slightly nicer place than what was there before. $15 million of new investment. What was the public investment that achieved that? Zero. If we can focus on where people struggle, if we can humble ourselves to ask some questions, we can find that we will make, as communities, very modest investments, hundreds of them, that are each one very low risk, but have high return potential. In other words, investments that will build our wealth without risking our future. And we can do this over and over and over and over again, in neighborhood after neighborhood, year after year after year, building our wealth, making our cities better places to live. And here's the trick. We cannot help but improve people's lives in the process. That's the essence of a Strong Towns approach. Thank you all for inviting me to be here today. If you're interested in knowing more about Strong Towns, we have 2 books out. One that came out last month, one that was out a couple years ago. You can get them anywhere, including at your local bookstore. And if you are interested in the Strong Towns approach, we publish new articles on our website 2-3 times a day. We've got 3 different podcast streams. We do a bunch of video, social media work. We are just trying to share this message with as many places as we can. And so I invite you to go to our website, get connected to what we're doing. And please, what I always tell people is if you really value these ideas and you want to do something to help, go tell someone about them. Go in your own words and tell somebody about these set of ideas. If you can do that, we can make the Iron Range, Central Minnesota, United States, much, much, much stronger. So thank you so much. I don't know how we're doing on time, but unless someone's going to kick me out of here, I'm happy to answer any questions or chat about anything that you guys would want, as long as we do have time. So please, is there anybody who has something they want to talk about, or something they want to ask me about, or?
I think we can have people do that, but we're gonna put the wall up so we for our next.
Oh, we're gonna put the wall up. Build the wall. Build the wall. Go ahead, please.
So you came to the downtown area probably about 10 years ago,
Which downtown area?
Grand Rapids.
Oh, yeah.
And you were in Old Central School, and I was there for that day.
Thank you.
We gathered in this small room of Old Central School. Old Central School still exists.
Yes.
It's still there. We're there in that building.
Beautiful.
And it has such awesome potential. But there's a lot of work to be done. And you say, invest in where your value is. I do believe there's value there, but the cost to fix up that building,
Yeah.
it's really costly.
Yeah.
So how do we get past that?
Yeah. I thank you for that. That was a wonderful day. I don't think it was 10 years ago, though. I hope not. I think it was.
Like 6
I think it was like 5, yeah.
Five.
Thank you. It's like time is going fast, but not that fast. Let me speak about something I know a little more about. And I think there's a corollary here, because I don't know specifically about that building, but I go to a church in Brainerd near my house. And right now, there was an announcement made, we're doing a capital campaign, we're gonna do this and this and this. And one of the things we're gonna do is we're going to build the priests a new house. Because the existing rectory is 100 years old, apostasy of having a building 100 years old. I live in a 100-year-old house, it's amazing. But you know, the idea of having a 100-year-old house, how could we possibly do that? And we need to tear this house down and build a new one. And that's the only thing that we could do. Look at all these things wrong with it. I read that and I feel bad because I want to support my church. I want to support the people in my church who are doing this hard work. But I also recognize that what they did is they went out and they hired an architect, and the architect came in and wrote a report, and the report said, hire an architect to build a building. And I get that, and I don't think anybody involved in that process is bad or evil, okay? But I know that if we just said today, what's the most urgent thing we need to do? And how do we make the best of fixing that? And we did that again next year, and we did that the year after, and the year after. Would we ever have a completed, finished product that we could just step back and say, we have no worries now? No, we would never have that. But guess what? That's life. And it's especially life in a poor place. And we are a poor place. And so I look around at other places. There's a really great city. One of the funnest, one of the best cities that I've ever been in. Yeah, I feel like you guys.
We're correcting grammar, we're sorry.
I know. The thing is, I said that and I knew right away that you guys would laugh at that. My wife would have corrected me right away. I hope you appreciate that I'm very real, like I'm from this place. So I say things like that. Like I say borrow when I mean loan, you know, that kind of thing. We all do around here. Water Valley, Mississippi. I was first in Water Valley probably in 2014. And the amazing thing is that this is a city that the downtown people just walked away from. I saw a building that had the roof caved in and a tree growing up. Okay? So when we talk about like, this is not salvageable, even to my eyes, this did not look salvageable. Guess what? They salvaged it. And they salvaged it because they started with what is the first thing we can do? And the first thing they did is they went and cut the tree down and they took all the stuff up the middle and they put a cheap, crappy roof on the top to keep it from getting worse. And then every year subsequent after that, they did a little thing and a little thing and a little thing. I don't want to make this too personal, but we just went through in Brainerd this $200+ million bond referendum, and we redid all of our neighborhood schools while abandoning 2. Breaks my heart. And the theory that we operate on is this theory of we're going to once in a generation make everything nice, spend 10 years living in something really, really nice that we don't have to worry about, spend 20 years watching it fall apart while we don't have the money to fix it or we don't take the time to fix it, and spend the last 5 years explaining why everything's so crappy and we need to build another round of really huge stuff to fix all the crappy things. I hate that. I hate it. And I wish we would just have a dedication to saying we're poor and poor people just don't let stuff fall apart. So let's just be prudent and do what we can right now with what we have. So I look at that building and I'm like, yeah, I'm sure it has all kinds of problems. What can we do right now to like address the worst one and make that a little bit better? And if we do that all the time, it's not going to fix everything. But like I said, like I talked to the priest of the church is not about quick fixes to problems and then walking away from them. The church is actually about day after day after day struggling with life. That's what this is, like own it. Sorry, that was like a ridiculously long answer to a simple question. Anybody else? Aaron's afraid to ask a question. Go ahead.
Do you have any other really good examples of people taking this on?
Oh, yeah, I mean, like all over. If you go to strongtowns.org/success, you'll get like 100 case studies. If you go to the Action Lab, which on our website, there's a link at the top. The Action Lab is like a help desk thing, and it's got connect to resources, connect to people, connect to examples. And in there's a whole bunch of examples of places. The Bottom Up Revolution podcast is one of our 3 podcast streams, and every week we interview people who have gone out and done Strong Towns type things. So yes, tons of examples.
One more. Chuck.
One more. Okay,
I have one from
go ahead.
a listener on Zoom asking,
Oh, great.
economic development organizations are rewarded for bringing in new employers who offer the promise of new jobs. What arguments
Stop.
could we?
So here's the problem. I don't know how many of you are in the like economic development, what have you done for me lately business? I suspect a lot of you. If you're not, if you're one of the people who directs them or signs their paycheck or holds them accountable, you need different metrics than what have you done for me lately. We need people doing economic development to be long-term community builders, not short-term sugar high people. And when we reward them, either, through accolades or what else, about bringing in the next big thing and the next big thing and the next big thing, or have our metrics of success be the churn of the community, it is such an unhealthy way to run a place. Pensacola, Florida was our strongest town of the year. Every year we have a strongest town contest. Pensacola won in 2019. One of the innovative things that they did is they have a community dashboard. An outside group, not the city, an outside group recognized this as a problem. They put this dashboard together, but now it's been adopted by the community and they all used it. Here's the thing. The dashboard lists, here's what we as a community hold as measurements of success. If you read the annual report of the city, measurements of success are things like new homes built, amount of road miles fixed, amount of road miles built. It's all like mechanisms of growth. If you look at the community dashboard, it's things like, what's our graduation rate? What's the median household income of the community compared to surrounding communities and the region? How quickly are we growing our community wealth? They had a problem there with kids starting kindergarten unprepared. And so they have some stuff on prenatal care and they have some stuff on early childhood development. These are metrics where they're saying, if we're successful in these things, we're successful as a community. And what you find, it has nothing to do with the ones that we measure. So if your measurement is how many new jobs did you create? How many new, businesses went up? How many new? You're measuring the wrong things. We need to go a level deeper and say, a new job does what for us? What are we actually trying to accomplish with that? In my first book, I have 2 scenarios. I call it Job City and Housing City. As in the Job City has nothing but like jobs, massive amounts of infrastructure and nothing but jobs, but the jobs are all intense. So no tax base, but just massive amounts of jobs. And the other place has very little infrastructure, but all the housing. In Minnesota, which one is actually better off? Home of Jobs is broke. Because in Minnesota, every one of your cities is run with a property tax system. So if you create a zillion jobs, but no tax base, you are broke. Creating jobs is not a metric of success. It is a byproduct of building a successful place. And I'll agree that you will see job creation as being something that shows up when you're doing it right. But if you focus on just the jobs, you're going to make a lot of dumb decisions. If you focus on building neighborhoods and communities and places that people want to be in, and make it easy for them to create jobs, what you'll see is that you'll get job creation. That's the Muskegon story. Thank you, everybody. Please, I live an hour and a half away. I love it here. I am not a diva or inaccessible in any way. I'm busy, but I'm happy to chat with any of you and be accessible to you. And if I can come up and help you with a difficult problem, please don't hesitate to get a hold of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chuck.